And this also ties into the fact that you guys had the worst EHD outbreak ever.
Well, I don't know. There's no way to prove this, but right here where we're sitting in Southeast Ohio, we're in Athens County, Ohio. We had, for sure, one of the worst known EHD outbreaks in the history of North America. There have been some other bad ones, but what was unique about this one was we've been dealing with EHD in this area for about 30 plus years in pockets. We'll have it in, this drainage, that ridge, this township, but, the areas around it, for whatever reason, it's a very spotty, kind of disease. This year, it blanketed hundreds of square miles. It blanketed almost the entire county, Washington County, which is just east of here. It blanketed about 2/3 of Meigs County, which is just south of here, and about 2/3 of Athens County, where we're sitting, to the tune of, they use a statistic, they say about 10% of the deer that die from EHD get reported to the DNR. So it has a lot to do with the time of year they die. They die in August, September. Nobody's in the woods, hot mosquitoes, and they die around water sources and creeks or whatever. Just not a lot of activity. People out there to find them. So they estimate that about 10% of the deer that die get reported. So in these 3 counties, there were about 5,500 deer reported. You extrapolate that times 10, that means we lost roughly 55,000 deer in 3 counties. It was so bad that there was very few areas around here that you could get out of your vehicle and not smell death. It was just unbelievable. And a lot of areas, I don't want to say they were wiped out, but they were almost wiped out. The majority of the deer that survived were yearlings or that year's fawns. And the thinking is the colostrum and the mother's milk gave them some immunity, but almost all of our adult deer were killed or died from that disease. It was just awful. But what was unique about this was it blanketed just a really big area versus spotty in pockets like we normally see it. So, for example, in the whole state of Ohio in 2023, there were 18 reported cases of EHD in the whole state. I personally found 72 last year within 5 miles of right here. Myself, I found 4 times as many deer, one guy, as the whole state found in 2023. So it was just really off the charts. And there's a lot of thinking as to why that happened, but most likely what happened, we had a very unusually wet May, June, and July. So we averaged these are rough numbers, like 4.3 inches of rain in this county in July. My rain gauge had about 14 inches of rain in July. So we had standing water everywhere because of all that rain. Then in August, the faucet shut off. We went like 3 or 4 weeks, no rain at all. So the water receded, exposed mud, and those midges, which are little like no-see-em gnats that spread that disease, it exposed all that mud. And so the midges were just off the charts. When I'd mow my yard in the afternoon, you'd have to wipe the midges off. They were just everywhere. And they bite us too, but obviously we don't get EHD, thank God. And it was just terrible. We had the first lab case confirmed in the lab in this county right around July 4th, which was over a month earlier than we've ever seen it in the history of Ohio. So it got an early start, and it's a kind of a deer density dependent disease where 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. So it got a really early start. So it took off, and it just literally just decimated our deer population. Now, hopefully the silver lining to that is that areas of the country that have, and even of this state, that have seen EHD outbreaks, severe EHD outbreaks, historically come back stronger than ever. And so in this area, prior to last year, we had more deer in this area than I'd ever seen. I'd been here since '82. I'd never seen, we had deer we had too many deer, to be honest with you. When I say too many, we weren't beyond the carrying capacity of the land, but we just had a lot of deer. And basically Mother Nature just said, hold my beer, I'll take care of that for you. And that's what happened.
Yeah. Let me ask, before the EHD breakout, and you were saying there's more deer than you've ever seen in this area.
Yeah.
Was there a noticeable browse line in the woods?
No. Okay. Maybe in metro parks and places like that, and in the city, some of the towns. Mm-hmm. But no, not out here. I never saw true browse lines like some other states that really have a lot of deer. Mm-hmm. But it was not uncommon. I live out here in the country. It was not uncommon to see 10 or 15 deer just in your ride in between here and town at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Not just in the evenings, they were literally deer bedding in yards and all over the place. We just had a lot of deer. And actually, our deer program administrator just retired, which he was our head deer biologist for the state. He's my neighbor here, and he's one of my good friends. And he had been telling me for the last 4 or 5 years, he said, Mike, we're heading for a cliff. we're heading for a cliff. And what he meant is that our deer densities are getting so high, and our Division of Wildlife is losing levers. It used to be we could add more season dates and more permits, but when you have more people interested in just trophy bucks, you can issue all the permits in the world and it doesn't really matter. And if access continues to get more and more limited, that doesn't mean if nobody can get at them, right? It doesn't matter the seasons and the permits and all that stuff. And so our Division of Wildlife is losing levers to pull to rein that back in. And he had been warning me for a while that, we were headed. I don't think in the state of Ohio, what we saw here last year, I don't think it's the last time we'll see it. I think we're going to see outbreaks in other areas of the state just like that. I mean, I can't say that for sure, but I just feel like that's going to happen.
Now, also one thing you were talking about with EHD, bad EHD breakouts in other areas of the country, you said a lot of times it comes back stronger than ever.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
So when it's stronger from a quality perspective. So here's an example. Jefferson and Harrison counties, which are on up the river from here, in 2017 had a pretty substantial, not as bad as this one, but they had a pretty strong EHD outbreak that blanketed a pretty wide area up there. And historically, those counties they're not great from a record buck perspective, but they're good, but they're not top tier. They're just kind of middle of the road. So at this last year's Buckeye Big Buck Club banquet, which most of those deer were killed in 2024. So 6 years after a really bad EHD outbreak, out of 88 counties in Ohio, Jefferson and Harrison were number 1 and number 2 in record book entries 6 years after a terrible EHD outbreak. So the thinking behind that is, so the other problem with the trophy hunting craze is we're targeting the best genetics. And in a 1 buck a year state, we're letting those 5 points and little, scraggly 6 points live to be 7, 8 years old because nobody wants to burn their buck tag on that deer. They want that 3.5, 4.5-year-old 150. And so Mother Nature comes in and chlorinates the gene pool. She's indiscriminate, right? So you start from scratch, and you have fewer deer on the landscape, which makes for better nutrition, less stress. When you have lots of deer on the landscape, they fight all the time and they're interacting with each other all the time. So everything about it is good, and it points back to the low deer densities. So you have low deer densities usually equals better quality. And that's, I think, what was seen in Jefferson and Harrison County is they came back stronger than ever because fewer deer on the landscape, better nutrition, less stress, and not necessarily better genetics, but they got rid of a lot of those quote unquote scrub bucks, started from scratch, right? And so now you had better record book class deer.
Yeah, that's impressive. I remember you saying that at dinner a couple nights ago,
Yeah.
And it was shocking because that's cool because you have that information because you deal with that all the time.
Yeah.
So you're able to see that in real time and see the performance. So it's not, it's unfortunate like what happened with the EHD breakout, but it gives people a little bit of hope if you have the patience.
Yeah.
The one thing that'd be tough is if you're a landowner or even if you lease ground up here. If you're stuck with that property, you just know for a few years it's going to be pretty rough.
Oh, yeah.
As the population's trying to make a comeback, the age structure's trying to get some age on it and everything. But like you said, within that 4 to 6 year range, you ought to see something pretty substantial happen.
Yeah, in theory. So I think the biggest fear is, and I've seen, some other areas of the country where they've said that, every 2, 3, 4 years they have and that's obviously a real concern. Now, if we can go 6, 7, 8 years without another one, we ought to have great hunting. But boy, if it's every 2 or 3 years, that'll be demoralizing.
Yeah.
We've actually seen a reduction in real estate values year over year in this area because of that EHD outbreak. And a lot of leases that guys had for years came up because they didn't want to pay to come lease, ground this year. And so this is actually a great time in this area to invest in ground because real estate prices have been depressed a little bit and there's a lot of leases available. And I've talked to several landowners that have said that the guys that quit them, they're going to tell them to pound sand, you know what I mean, if they come back. So this is actually a pretty good time if you want to hunt in an area like this.
Very, very, very interesting. So, is there anything else in that EHD conversation that's worth noting to give people where there's a little bit of hope or a little bit more understanding? Because at some point this summer, we're going to get reports from somewhere in the country with EHD breakouts. Yeah.
Well, in theory, if you have fewer deer on the landscape, so they're not exactly sure how EHD overwinters, where does it come from? And the one theory I've heard is they call it the typhoid Mary theory, which 100 and some years ago when typhoid spread all around the globe. There was this gal, Mary, who was she was like a maid to a very wealthy guy that traveled, and she was infected with typhoid but didn't get sick, and so she spread it around. So there's some theories that some deer are infected with EHD, can be contagious, but don't get sick. And so a midge bites that deer, then it bites another deer that doesn't have that same immunity. It gets sick, and then another midge bites that, and that's how it explodes. And so there's some other theories that the midges go down and they actually survive the winter. They go down below the frost line and they're able to survive the winter. I'm not exactly sure if anybody really knows how that disease lives, year over year. But I can tell you that, like I said, we've had it here in this area for at least 30 years. But conditions last year were it was just a perfect storm. Just a lot of deer, a lot of rain, made a lot of midges, equaled a lot of death. And so, in theory, we shouldn't have that problem for a while because we just don't have the deer densities that we had.
And see, what's interesting is, because we've never really had a discussion about EHD, but an interesting thing is I always thought it was something to do with drought. Just overall drought.
That used to be the thinking, yeah.
But
it's baloney. But yeah, that used to be the thinking.
Yeah, so that's not true at all. But you have to have a lot of moisture and then dry.
So the drought theory was this: that the deer would congregate at watering holes. So they would all get together because water was limited, and then the midges were there and they'd bite all the deer. And there also used to be a theory that it would pick on bucks more than does because they find more dead bucks than does. And the thought there is that, well, bucks are in bachelor groups in the summer where the does are spread out in family units across the landscape, and the bucks all go to that one watering hole where the midges are, and they all get bit and they all get sick. I've heard other theories that, when antlers are growing, there's blood running through them, there's more surface area for the midge to bite. And I'm not exactly sure. Although I will say in this area last year, I did not see any discriminatory. They just killed them all. There was no bucks versus does. It just killed almost everything.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Not something we deal with very much in the South.
Well, in the South, you guys have had it longer, right? And so I read something not long ago where in Texas, an area in Texas where they were doing serum samples on deer, like 80 plus or 85% of the deer in that area tested positive for antibodies to EHD. So in most areas of the South, you have EHD in the South. It just doesn't wipe them out like it does up here. You lose about 1 out of 10. We lose like 9 out of 10. So it's just much more pronounced up here. You would not notice it down there because 10% of your deer on a bad year is still not, not that noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very rare for us to see because when they survive it, there's something that happens with their hooves.
Yeah, they slough off. And they get what's called a fever line. We actually, so in this county and in this area, the Division of Wildlife did serum sample tests and they did some tissue sample tests. I actually provided about 10% of the samples for them from friends that I knew that killed deer during the hunting season. And 54% of those deer, these are the deer that survived the outbreak, tested positive for EHD. They had antibodies, meaning that they got it and lived through it. They were the 10% that lived through it. And I got trail camera photos of several deer this year that were walking and their backs were like hunched up and their hooves looked like elf shoes. Like they like curved up where the end of their hooves were sloughing off, where you could tell they had survived it. Most of the mature bucks that I saw killed in this area were EHD survivors. They had what's called a fever line. It was like a line through the hoof and the ends of their hoofs were all like cracked and broken. That's a telltale sign that a deer has had EHD and lived through it.
Yeah, I've seen that. I could count on one hand how many times I've seen that in the Southeast. Like the first time, a buddy killed one a couple years ago on a local management area that I lived close to, and he sent me pictures of it, and he was all skinny and emaciated looking. This was in November, and his hooves were like that. He had the elf shoes and everything. He's like, "What is wrong with this deer?" And I'm like, "I think that's EHD. That's the first time I've ever seen it in Alabama."
So the EHD outbreaks up here in the Midwest and North, they usually end with the first frost, which is usually middle to end of October. So that would make sense in the South. You probably hadn't had a frost. That's why the deer was still emaciated. Might have still been sick at that time because you hadn't had anything to kill those midges off.
Yeah, he was afraid to eat it.
Yeah, humans can't catch it, but I still don't know that I'd want to eat one that looks sickly like that.
Yeah, probably wouldn't get much meat off of him, honestly.
Yeah.